Hello and welcome to WPLDN Daytime. Diane, Leo, thank you so much for joining me on stage here. Very excited to be back at another WPLDN. Has it really been a month since we were last here on a daytime event?
I can't
Apparently.
remember what day it is. Every day, as I said to you before, Dan, is a Thursday. As long as you remember every day of the week is a Thursday, then it doesn't really matter.
It really is incredible, isn't it? Where is time going at the moment?
Yes, exactly. But it is moving.
It is,
good.
yes.
It's good. We're moving into a more proactive and productive time, so it's great.
Absolutely. So if you've not been here before, so the WPLDN Daytime, if you've been to our evening events, the WordPress London Meetup previously, WPLDN Daytime is a slightly more trimmed down version of our evening event. We had a conversation and we looked at what was going on around the, within the community, and we spent a lot of time in front of our screens throughout the day. And we were asking the question: do people want to be spending more time come the evenings in front of their screens? And there are many people out there that said that they didn't. So we decided to deliver this event through the daytime. So it's an opportunity just to take a little bit of a break in your day. Come together and catch up on some of the latest what's going on in and around WordPress, and an opportunity to hear a fantastic speaker. So these events are brought to us by Big Orange Heart, made possible by a community of volunteers. Collectively, this team of volunteers make up Big Orange Heart. Big Orange Heart is a charity that supports and promotes positive wellbeing and mental health within the remote working communities. You'd be more than welcome to come and join us if you are interested in connecting with the community and understanding a bit more about what Big Orange Heart does. Visit bigorangeheart.org/join. So this afternoon, I'm so used to saying this evening.
Evening, afternoon.
It's all blurring.
It all blurs into one. One endless no.
We are your hosts. So I'm Dan Maybe. I'm the founder of Big Orange Heart. I've been involved running WPLDN for too long, many years now. Do quite a bit in and around the WordPress community, and we're here to deliver this event for you this afternoon. To my left, my right, Diane. Diane, do you want to just introduce yourself?
I'm Diane Wallace, and I'm a freelance WordPress theme and plugin developer.
Excellent, thank you. And Leo, do you want to say a quick hello?
I'm Leo. I run a digital sports agency, Sotic, who deliver sites for governing bodies and federations using WordPress.
Excellent, thank you. And Paul.
Afternoon, everybody. Paul. I run a small agency just outside London, Smart Digital, and also work on the Big Orange Heart sponsorship team.
You certainly do. Thank you very much. Okay, so just very quickly, want to say a thank you to our sponsors. Passionate about making the web a better place, Automatic. Your managed cloud hosting platform, Cloudways. A turnkey solution for product vendors, agencies, and developers, Dolly. Generate more leads for your digital agency, Funnel Packs. The WordPress multilingual plugin, Weglot. Tips, tricks, and resources for people who use WordPress, Winning WP. Your all-in-one WordPress platform, WP Dev. And the search engine optimization plugin for WordPress, Yoast. I just want to say a big thank you to all of these companies. These companies each sponsor Big Orange Heart and enable us to be able to deliver these events. So we would really appreciate it if you could say thank you to them. If you type in your browser big.ht/thanks, that'll put together a nice little neat tweet for you to send out, and it will send a thanks to each one of these companies. If it wasn't for these companies, then we wouldn't be able to continue doing what we're doing and delivering free wellbeing and mental health support into the remote working community. So please, we would really appreciate it if you could help us thank these companies and support us. Also want to say a quick thank you to Blue 37, Paul Smart, and Sotic for giving time and volunteering time and enabling us to deliver these events. So on to this afternoon. Really looking forward to this one. We've got Tim Nash, who's going to be joining us. Tim has often scared me a little bit in the past. So really
I'm glad you're not the only one. I'm glad I'm not the only one, actually.
We'll dive in a little bit more into that.
Thank goodness he's on our side. That's
absolutely.
Completely. But before we go into our talks, as I say, this is a trimmed down version of WPLDN. So we're going to swiftly run through our community announcements. It's an opportunity, if you're aware of anything that's going on in and around the community right now, to please drop them in the chat. If you're in live.bigorangeheart.org, please do on the right hand side there, drop any announcements we have, and we'll try and get them up on the screen here throughout the announcements. First up, we've mentioned this several times over the last few events, the make.wordpress.org/community/events/online. A lot of events obviously have moved into this digital format, into this virtual format in this current climate. There's actually 15 online events running today listed on that page. So if you're with us here now, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. WordCamp US, the next large regional WordCamp coming up. So that has recently announced is going to be an online event happening 27th to the 29th of October. Their call for sponsors is currently open. So if you hit 2020.us.wordcamp.org, you can find some more details if you want to get your company up there and featured across that event. Okay, this one, I thought this was very interesting. WordPress 5.5 coming up will allow you to update your plugins via a file upload. I don't know, has anybody on here ever wanted this opportunity to be able to update your plugins via an upload?
Yeah, particularly on some of the paid plugins and plugins which come from outside of a repository, it would have been very useful. And it sometimes you sit there and you stumble over that and you're going, how do I update this plugin? So yes, I am pleased about it, that it's there now, finally.
Yeah, it was so this tweet with Pascal, there was some interesting responses. I think on the whole, very positive. Yoast stating this will bring down testing times so much. Awesome work. I think there was a lot of praise for bringing this functionality. It is needed functionality. It's incredibly useful in that that development cycle. But there was also a bit of a backlash. I just wanted to interesting to see Brian's comments. It's this kind of stuff that depresses me about WordPress, and it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, looking through the conversation, SVN was highlighted as one of the reasons for people not contributing and not helping move some of these tickets along a bit further in a slightly shorter time frame. I think 11 years is probably a little bit excessive, isn't it, for an open track ticket?
That is quite, yes.
But so let's put that into perspective. 11 years, that's pre-mass iPhones. I think we were still on Blackberries, or a lot of people were. So that gives you some sort of context of when they're there.
I wonder if anyone knows what is the oldest open ticket.
Yes.
Tweet us now, and let us know what that is.
Probably a request to remove Hello Dolly or something. So that would be it. Yeah.
Brilliant. It is obviously this, as an open source community, we have a collective responsibility in relation to these tickets. But we've got a question: if the tools are becoming a barrier, then obviously there's further conversations that we need to have as a community around that. And I appreciate there is definitely work around the use of GitHub and alternative tools, away from SVN specifically. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think somebody's put up there about SVG being out 13 years, and that to my knowledge, is still requiring a plugin to support. But I know that we've got Tim coming on, and I'm going to get into trouble if I talk about open access for SVGs and being able to upload and things like this. I could probably almost see him bearing his eyes are bearing into me now already.
Absolutely. Okay, just swiftly moving on. Web stories for WordPress. It's been kicking around a little bit for the last couple of weeks. I don't know if anybody's had any experience and the opportunity to give this a try yet. Stories have been we've seen an explosion of the use of stories across social platforms like Instagram and Facebook and so on. So to have them come to the open web, I thought was an interesting way of producing content. We've actually, if you hit big.ht/story, you can see we've trialed this on the Big Orange Heart site. You can actually see a live web story. These are designed mobile first, for mobile first consumption, but of course they do work across desktop as well. I just thought, I wonder what our thoughts are on the introduction of web stories in this format.
I think that it's, as you said, it's very popular. So it's a popular way for people to get their ideas out quickly. Personally, I wish that it wasn't built on top of AMP, only because I've had to fight with AMP. So I feel slightly ambivalent towards it because it's much easier to put into a WordPress site than it is to take out. But like I said, people like stories because they get a message out. It can have a great impact in a really short space of time, which is how people are consuming a lot of content now. So
I think Diane hits on a number of points there. One I'm gonna not disagree with, which is AMP. I know everybody in a way doesn't like it, but the reality is that it's become it's sort of like you've got to park your negativity about AMP at the moment, because AMP, if you're doing anything in the news environment, Google will not publish your news if you don't produce it in AMP. So you'll now have to have AMP support on your news stories if you want them to appear in any of the news environments. However, the problem is it's a walled garden within a walled garden, and that everybody wants to see go, hold on, you're reducing my flexibility, and that I can appreciate. But then you look at what you're able to produce with this, with the examples, and you can see why. If you take something like TikTok as a good example, people are producing massive amounts of content where they are told, this is the audio that you're allowed, this is how you're supposed to do it, this is the editing. They're still delivering a lot of content. Maybe you agree or disagree with it and what sits behind it, but it is very, very successful in delivering in a certain environment.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's a much larger conversation, which unfortunately we don't have time for at this moment. But that discussion of the open web and AMP sitting in the same conversation, and I think that's a really interesting one. I know there's been a lot of the AMP project is an open source project, but I think there's definitely a really interesting discussion to be had around that. But as I say, unfortunately, we don't have time to dive into that right now.
Yeah, I agree.
So another topic of notifications, admin notifications. It's something that this issue's flared up many times, and there's been Scott Bollinger's tweet this week highlighted the issue again, and it's something that we as a community keep having conversations in relation to. And when the dashboard starts looking like this, it becomes a major issue when you're releasing your sites to clients. And just how do we tackle this? What do we do in relation to this? Because there's arguments for, if you're using free plugins, should you have the ability to be able to, promote what you're doing? But then if you've got these huge, great big walls of notifications, are you then just going to be missing important notices?
I wonder whether. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I wonder whether to have maybe a rule that warnings appear at the top of the dashboard. But upsells could maybe appear lower down so that they don't get in the way of whatever you're trying to do. That's just an idea, because otherwise things just get lost in the noise.
See, it's quite an interesting argument, this, because you can sit here and say, why doesn't things like this happen in a sort of a closed environment like Apple iPhones, where they have actually locked down and said what notifications you're allowed to do and how you're allowed to do them, and when people try and steer outside of them, they push them either back or they take them off. At the end of the day, there's always that argument that you're either paying for something or you're being used as the customer to get something. So if you're not paying for a plugin, it's very difficult, because somebody's got to make money somewhere to be able to continue doing something. I understood from when we were at WordCamp Europe last year in the real world, there was a plan to, I'm sure I sat in and heard about, there was a plan to streamline all the notifications to come up and bring that into core. I don't remember what happened on that. Maybe somebody who knows.
So I've just pulled up on screen there. So Birgit's response actually to Scott's tweet actually highlights the track ticket in relation to specifically this. There is a piece of work that's being undertaken to try and manage notifications.
Got you. So I can then add that story in the last one. So this will be ready in 12 years' time.
It's a really tricky one, this one, isn't it? There are so many factors to it, and it's unfortunately there's no simple solution. When we talk about security and we talk about other things like this and we talk about updates, if you're sitting here with a platform which is just throwing stuff at you all the time, you're never going to see the bits that are supposed to be important. And we all know that around Christmas time, or when I think it was, Yoast apologized for throwing out a notification using their thing, and they said, we're really sorry and we won't do it again. So it will be interesting to see how this evolves. Yes. Yeah. Okay, sorry, we're going to have to swiftly move on again. We're actually over time already. I just wanted to very quickly mention this one, the new stripe.com. I don't know if people have an opportunity to see the new site. The reason we're highlighting this is, from a UX UI perspective, Stripe do pretty well in that area. And there's this interesting thread from Corey Haynes talking about the UX and UI, and he's titled it "So before you copy it." And there's just some. I highly recommend taking a look at that thread if you are interested in UX UI. There's a lot to be learned in relation to what Stripe are doing there. It's a really interesting thread of comments. And there also happens to be a little Easter egg tucked away in the new stripe.com website. I don't know if anybody's seen this. If you hit stripe.com and hit a up, down, left, right, BA, you can actually see some controls to control that background, which that's always a nice little thing to be hidden away.
I think this is really good, because the further we move away from people thinking they should do their own payment gateways and pass this over, because some of the clients I've had in the past, it's like, but we don't like the look of that payment gateway, it's clunky, etc. And you're going, and then they want to do it themselves, and the risk factor of everything to do with that is just a nightmare that I just don't ever want to go back down that road again. So the fact that they're always improving this and improving payment gateways is a good thing.
Absolutely, yes. They don't seem to be able to do too much wrong from Stripe, which is it's a fantastic product.
I don't like it when I'm trying to use my business credit card and my personal credit card. It seems to get a bit. It's like sometimes you've bought it before you've had a chance to change, but that's about it.
Excellent. Okay, right. So, just very, very quickly. Big Orange Heart, as I mentioned at the start, is a charity that's supporting positive wellbeing and mental health within the remote working communities. It's a charity that's is delivering free mental health services. We've just released, if you visit big.ht/open, we've released a document that gives you a breakdown of an average expenditure over through 2019. to deliver that free support, it came in at a cost of £10,251 per month to deliver this, a little over 7,500 hours of support. So we really would appreciate the ability, if you have the ability to be able to support this charity. If you're a company, if you're looking to get exposure across, across our events and across the various other activities that the charity undertakes, then big.ht/sponsor is for you. If you are able to make a donation, every penny makes a difference. $10 a month really does make a huge impact. As we saw there, £16 an hour is average cost for us to deliver free support. So a $10 donation, that's a half hour of free support that we're able to deliver into the community for individuals that are incredibly vulnerable. And right now at this time, we're seeing a huge increase in demand on the service and people reaching out. Understandably, there's some incredibly difficult times that people are going through right now. So if you could visit big.ht/give, I would be eternally grateful. Okay, so on to this afternoon's talk. We are going to invite Tim up on stage. Let me pull off these slides. Where are you, Mr. Nash? There you are. Tim, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you
Hi,
so
Tim.
much for joining us this
Tim.
afternoon. So you're going to scare us all again?
No,
You beat me to that
non-scary talk.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going for non-scary. So we're testing our fortifications here, aren't we? So we're talking about hacking ourselves and a few other bits around our security. So
this is the nice, easy talk. No one's going to be scared. Everybody can do it. It's all going to be fine.
Excellent. Well, we're not going to take up any longer now. We're going to hand over to you. I'm going to bring up your slides onto the screen for you. There we go. We're all going to duck out. If you are on live.bigorangeheart.org, over in the live chat, if you have any questions at all, please drop them in there. We will then, after Tim has finished his talk, we will come back and have a live Q&A session. But for now, Tim, thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Hello, everybody. My name's Tim Nash. I'm the WordPress platform lead at 34sp.com, if you've not heard of me before. And I am predominantly known, at least in the UK WordPress community, as someone who comes around and tries to scare everybody with security. I've gone around and given scary talks that are designed to just terrify people. I've also given talks which are full of just practical, do this, do this, do this, do this. This time, I want to take people through a way of testing your sites and seeing what needs to be improved. It's been billed as a talk on pen testing, and that's true in so much that I will show you some of the tools and techniques to be used in a pen test. A pen test is shortened for penetration testing, but it isn't a step-by-step, you do this, do this, do this, and you'll come out with a pen test. We'll talk a little bit about why it isn't in a little while. So this is all about testing your website and seeing if that security is really as good as you thought it was. So I guess the first question we have to ask ourselves is why? Why do we want to do this? Why do we want to test our... Oh yeah, that sounds really obvious when someone says it like that. If you're using security plugins, you're throwing these things, you've gone and told all your users that they must use strong passwords. Do you then trust them? Do you then think, oh yeah, that's fine. We totally believe everything that our users ever say to us. We're sure that the software we're using has been configured correctly. We don't need to test. Of course we do. So running through and doing your own tests means that when a bad actor comes along, hopefully their tests, in inverted commas, won't find anything because yours did first. The other reason why we might be doing this is compliance. If you've ever running any sort of payment gateway or system on your site, you're probably under the auspices of PCI DSS compliance. So you probably have to do something. So why? Because it's a really good idea. We definitely should be doing this. We want to know about vulnerabilities and issues before the bad actors tell us about them, because their way of telling us is not as much fun. And free, it's really cool, and we get to play around with fun tools and pretend we're hackers for like 10 seconds. So who should do it? the tools I'm going to show you, some of them are a little technical. So they require you to have a little bit of familiarity with the command line. But that shouldn't stop anybody who's watching this presentation from using them, from playing around with them and trying. Anybody who is a developer, system administrator, or someone who is a site owner who owns the product should be at least partially familiar with the terms and technologies that I'm talking about, even if you don't then go and do it. However, you doing a security test is no replacement for an actual security firm doing it. So there's going to be times where there is compliance, where you have to have a security test being done in a specific way, in a specific manner. That has to be done by a particularly qualified person. Again, PCI DSS self-assessment is fine, but often you are also required to have a third-party assessor if you're at a certain scale. There will be other times where payment gateways will demand that you have a third-party audit. The NHS often requires a third-party audit. Other people will do too. So at those times, you want to go away. You also, probably if you have the budget for it, should get a third-party audit. If you're running an e-commerce site and it's making money, get a third party to audit. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do your own testing along the same time. It just means it would be a good idea to have a third party just validate your own findings, if nothing else. Also, I assure you, anybody who does go and get a third party audit done, they will bring you back a wealth of stuff you never thought about. And that's quite cool. Then if we've done the who and when, who and why, the obvious thing is why. The obvious thing is when. And when is really simple, continuously. Too often do we talk about doing security at the end, or at the beginning, or in the middle, but as a thing, that's one-off thing. Oh, and when we have to do that security stuff. Now, security should be baked into your entire process. Right from the start, when you're first talking about development, when you're running on local development environments, when you're putting it into staging, each one of these steps can be tested. Whenever you're pushing changes, they can be tested. And really, the best thing to do is to always be testing. And some of the tools I'm going to show you can be run headlessly. A lot of the techniques and things can be automated. So you don't have to be involved in that process. It just comes back as a pass or a fail. So when, do it constantly. But it's all well and good just saying, yep, just constantly run tests. If you don't know what you're testing for and why you're testing, there's no point. And to understand why we're testing, we have to talk about risk. Now, human beings were very good at risk. For example, if I was to give you this picture and asked you which path should you go, you will, on the whole, unless it came from me, pick the one with the rainbow. Now, half the audience is going, it's Tim, it's a trap. We clearly go down the dragon route. And I'll explain why actually that half of the room's correct right at the end. But most of us can assess, look at something and go, okay, that's dangerous and that's not dangerous. When it comes to computers and servers and systems and things behind multiple layers, it's much harder and it gets obscured. But on the whole, we as human beings are quite good at working out risk. And everything has a risk. Running a website has a risk attached to it. The moment you put an endpoint on the web so that can accept a post request, your risk just increased massively because now, as a bad actor, I can post data to you. And so you now have to worry about sanitizing that data and doing all sorts of other stuff. So everything we build has risk associated with it. Doing testing allows us to work out what that risk is and if we need to mitigate it. But whenever you're building an application, risk should always be the primary thing you're thinking about when you're implementing things, which is easy for me to say as someone who's interested in security. But when your people are saying, but no, accessibility is the most important thing and usability is the most important thing, and actually the thing working is the most important thing, surely. And I'm there going, no, risk is the most important thing. So a really simplified threat model is asking just 4 questions. What are we building? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about this? And afterwards, as part of a feedback loop, did we do a good enough job? Every time you approach anything to do with your website, you should be asking those questions. What are we building? What can go wrong with it? And that's not just security stuff, that's just stuff in general. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to mitigate these problems before they happen? And then did our mitigation work well? With using pen tests and security tests, we can map a lot of that to our testing with scope boundaries, vulnerabilities, presentation, and remediation. And I love this tweet because for all of this, you're inevitably going to miss something. Security testing isn't about getting 100% coverage, because 100% coverage isn't actually possible. Something is going to be missed out of your scope. You're going to get it wrong. But this is about catching stuff. And hopefully, and the tests that we're doing today are all about catching really simple stuff. We're not trying to find those super duper complicated things, because honestly, most websites, and I will go out on a limb and say 99.99999% of websites are recurring, it's nearly always a known vulnerability and updated software. It's either the software isn't up to date or someone's password was incredibly weak. It's only in very rare exceptional circumstances it's not one of those two scenarios. So we're going to be testing more for those than anything else. So how do we go about doing this? Well, the very first thing we need to do is decide what's in scope. Now, scope just means what we're targeting, what we're not targeting. So our scope should include what we're targeting. Is it just this website? Is it our entire fleet of websites? Maybe we have 10, 20 websites. Is it just the site itself, or do we also have access to are we targeting the servers? Is it just the WordPress application? Can we find bugs in Nginx or Apache and exploit those? Can we see if the database is open and exploit that? The next question is, do we want to give ourselves access to the code base? Now, normally, if you are hiring a third party, they will ask you whether you want to do a white box or a black box test, and basically whether or not a white box is where it's completely transparent and they have access to the code base and everything that you know, and a black box is opaque and you can't see, so they have access to nothing but the external resources available to them. Now, for you, I would always recommend doing a mixture of both, trying to approach it first as an external party and then trying to work back internally. Is networking scope? Quite often, you don't manage your own networks. You're going to be, especially if you're not happen to work for a hosting company, you probably use somebody else's hosting, and therefore you probably are using their networks. Is the networking scope? Chances are the answer should normally be no. You probably don't want the networking scope unless you've got some sort of agreement. And if you have got the networking scope, you need to make sure that you've got permission. In fact, that should be very clear right from the start. You only have to do any of the things I'm talking about with the correct permissions in place. This becomes exceedingly important for employees. Employees in scope, what does that mean? That can mean, can I target an employee with a phishing email to make them click on a link and open it up? Do social engineering on them? Initially, that sounds great. Yeah, okay, let's allow that. Okay, so I'm going to send phishing emails to the company accounts. Can I send it to their personal account? Can I phish them on Twitter? Can I send them Slack notifications? Certainly, this is creeping. And legalities start getting confusing and blurring. There are several UK laws surrounding what we're doing. One is the Computer Misuse Act. The other is GDPR and data protection stuff. Do not fall foul of either. Written permission everywhere. If you're in any doubt, employees, not in scope. Employee data and personal data, bad place to go. Do not go. Do not pass go. Do not collect £200. So, we worked out a scope. We're just going to target the WordPress website for today. Let's do some reconnaissance. When was the last time? Oops. We're going to skip over that. When was the last time you visited your site? I mean, actually visited it. You went and took your time to just click around the website. Can you think of all the features you've got? All the pages, where they are, what's on them? what widgets you're using in your sidebars on different pages. Oh, those Gutenberg blocks, you know, you had it everywhere. The contact form. Is the contact form just on the contact page, or is it on contact page -2, where you built that second page and it didn't quite go to plan? What about that draft post you posted, but you never quite finished, and it had that little PHP snippet on it that would just allow you to execute any random PHP? All of these things you've probably forgotten about. We don't use our websites. We post to them, we do stuff around them, but very rarely do developers and site owners actually use their own sites. So step one is to go and have a look. You'll be amazed how much you're just looking around with a new mindset of what could be bad. Where are the forms? Where are the forms? Look for forms. Look for things that are taking data in. And you'll start going, oh, okay, I forgot we had that. Oh, we don't need that. Having a wander around your site sounds utterly low tech, because it is, but it's a good place to start. The next place is to look at it a bit more, well, using curl. So all we're doing here is asking for the headers of a website. Here comes back mine. Throughout all of this, I'm going to be using a few example sites. My own site from like a year ago. The BBC, because they let you crawl it lots. And then a couple of examples that are offline that are stuff where they've got stuff that can break on them easily. So here's an example on my site. It's coming back, and all I've done here is done curl, which is basically goes and grabs the website and a web address and pulls it back. -I says, just bring me back the headers. I don't care about the content. I just want to see what headers are being returned. And this is from my homepage. And we can see that I'm running over HTTP2. Not that interesting. Server Nginx. That's interesting. Now we immediately know something about the site that we didn't know before. We know that it's running over Nginx. We can see that it's got some security headers on there. So someone cares a little bit about security because it's got HSTS header there. That's the strict transport security one. And then we can see the X-frame options and the XSS protection. So we can see that there is some security headers there. That gives us a little bit of a hint that they've at least heard of security, maybe. We can also see this person hasn't got a content security policy and that's not good at all. He's probably going to get hacked before the end of this episode. But we can go through, look at these various headers. There are a few there that are really interesting. So the X-Tech API, well, what's all that all about? That's an interesting set of headers we might want to be look at more carefully later. We can also see that fast CGI cache bypass. We can see that there's some caching involved. This is good. This means there might be some opportunities to store things into the cache and get them back. On their own, none of this is particularly immediately useful. It's all about gathering intelligence. So let's go do the same for the BBC. We can see if we go to https://bbc.co.uk, we're getting a 301, and we can see that that server is using Varnish. Now, Varnish is a proxy server. Varnish means the stuff behind the Varnish server. We can see it missed. That makes total sense. You don't really normally cache head requests with that -I. Okay, so, and it's also a 301 because I should have been going to the www version. So let's go see the www version. Okay, few things have changed. We're not hitting Varnish anymore. Or if we are, it's not at least telling us. So we've now moved servers. At the very least, we know that we're now getting a different HTTP server responding to us. We can see that we've hit a cache. That's interesting because we don't normally cache head requests. And we can see a couple of extra information there. Again, we can see an X-frame options, same origin, but it's not got a HSTS header, for example. That's mildly interesting. So that's the BBC's homepage. But what if we were to go to their news page? Okay, now we've got another set of headers, another server. Now this time it's using OpenResty. OpenResty is a Nginx with a bunch of bolt-ons on for it. Again, we're hitting the cache, and we can see that we're hitting a cache and it's getting the same information as before. So it's a reasonable chance that the main homepage is also running on OpenResty. It just wasn't advertising it. So now we know we've got a good idea that both of those servers were running on OpenResty. Again, other stuff on there, but the big thing for us is that we now know that the BBC is running very much as a microservice. We can see that different sections are running to different servers. And in fact, if you hit CBeebies, you get a completely different set of servers. Now, that's useful for us because now not only are we targeting just one set of servers, we know we could be targeting multiple sets. Next up on the list, just grab a copy of the robots.txt file. You'll be amazed what it shows. For example, it will give you a sitemap with all the listed URLs in there if you've got something like Yoast or the SEO framework. That will bring you back a heap of URLs for you to immediately go and target. Along the same side, we can see what's being disallowed and allowed. You'll be amazed how many people do silly things like put disallow / my secret portal in here, where my secret portal is full of useful and exposed information. And they thought that the best way to hide this was just to stop search engines coming for it. Anything someone deliberately and explicitly says, I don't want access to, you as a tester go, oh, I want access. Let's go there. Robots.txt, really simple indicator. Oh, we're off to find a dig. So dig is just a very simple command to find out the IP address of the server that you're going to be communicating with. So if I do dig a timnash.co.uk, it returns me the A record, which is an IP address for that server. So I can then use that later for my testing. So I know that if I can go to 80.82.119.149 with timnash.co.uk in my host file, I'll hit that server. If we do the same thing with the BBC, we'll see, oh, no, if we do the same thing with timnash, but short, we just get the short version. If we do the same thing with BBC, we can see that the BBC is returning multiple IP addresses. So if we wanted to make sure that we were testing for the right things, we could take that information and we could put just one of those IP addresses into our host file. Then we'd know we'd get our own stuff back and we'd always be hitting the same server. If we, though, start looking at that more carefully, and we dig the www version, because we know that all of this is on weird microservices, and we know that this version is going to be definitely proxying to other things. We can see that we've got the CNAME, and then we're being taken into a whole new network called bbc.net.uk. We can slowly start to see the topology of their network by just going around and just digging through. If you do the same with your own sites, you'll start realizing that if it's behind things like Cloudflare, you'll be able to start seeing where all your main pages lead to. Again, if we go into the BBC under the .co.uk, we can see it's actually a CNAME for bbc.net, and then that returns us yet more addresses. So it just keeps this building up. There are other dig records we could use. For example, we could do dig name servers, and then we can get back people's name servers. This is useful more for us just to confirm what we're seeing. For example, quite often if you dig NS and a person's, you're going to get Cloudflare back, and we know that they're sitting behind a proxy. So most of the information we just got previously was unhelpful to us. There's a few others we could be doing. Any is a DNS record that doesn't always return. But if you can use DNS any, it will return you all the information from every record. Not every DNS server will provide that. So DNS Made Easy, who I use for my DNS, does, but quite a lot of people, if you do dig any, you'll get back. However, it's quite handy. I haven't worked out why it's quite handy if you're not a person trying to be malicious, but it's quite handy, I guess, if you just want to know what all the records are and you don't have access to your own hosts file. And so, yeah, anyway, there must be a reason why the any record exists, but other than being for nefarious purposes, I haven't quite worked out what it is. So for dig, you've got, you can do dig A, or any of those will return the different types of records. So you could do dig MX and you can get the MX records. We can also do add plus short on there. That tells us about our site and where our site's going. But we can also go and do a reverse DNS. Now, reverse DNS basically says, I have, well, I'll give you an example. I have this IP, tell me all the sites on it. Now, the problem is reverse DNS isn't a thing. How it works is that companies and organizations, for example, rapid7.com have a massive database, and they basically collect all the domains. So they go through DNS looking for site and then its IPs, and then adds it into a database, and then it inverts it. So the IP then lists the number of sites. You then need a tool like RDNS to then convert that out. But it allows you to suddenly see what other sites are on a IP. This is really useful. Now, if you're in a shared hosting environment, this is going to list a lot of sites, and you're going to be suddenly surprised at how much other people are using the same server as you. But on smaller places and places that are using VPSs, we can start seeing the subdomains. Do we see a staging site? Do we see a dev site? Can we see V2, V3? Can we see older versions? Are those in scope? Chances are they are. So we can start manipulating and looking at those as well as the main site. And they can be treasure troves because they are nearly always less well guarded and security measures are often not in place. A good example is staging sites. It's really often you find on staging sites that they do not have caching in front of them, and they possibly don't have security rules put in place because they're there expecting lots of developers to be doing stuff with them. The final tool in our reconnaissance bag is Whois. Whois used to be amazing. You used to be able to just go Whois, put in a domain, and it would give you a bunch of information back. Now, these days, because of GDPR, Whois is sort of not useful for domains except in certain circumstances. Where it is useful is for IPs. So if we've got an IP, we can just do a Whois against it and immediately find out who owns the IP. Now, that IP won't be connected to the site, but it will be connected to the host or the network that they're on. So this will allow us to quickly and easily work out whose network that they use. So what about if somebody is sitting behind a proxy? If they're sitting behind something like Cloudflare, etc., it's much harder to find information. Now, if we start digging and using the dig records, we can often find that odd record that used to reflect the original hosting. But another way to do that is to use a tool like Security Trails, which allows us to take the domain and it will show us all the previous versions of the domain, where it was hosted, what the IPs were. So quite often, people will swap to Cloudflare from their original host. So they haven't changed hosts, they've just put Cloudflare in front of it. We'll be able to look at the historic records and go back. How we can do that is we can simply see what the IP was before because it shows up in Security Trails, take that and add it to our host file, and now we might hopefully have direct access. Again, this assumes that Cloudflare hasn't been set up, or the proxy. It doesn't have to be Cloudflare security have one. There are plenty of other reasons why you'd be hiding a proxy. But this assumes that the proxy isn't actually being checked against, and we can just go straight on through. It doesn't always work, but it works enough of the time to make it worthwhile putting it into a talk. Okay, so now we're going to map things. This is the point where you can join us even if you didn't want to do the reconnaissance stuff. Nmap is a really simple tool. We just go nmap and give it an IP, and it will come back and tell us what ports are open. So we'll look at this one. This nmap is nmap -o and then the host name. So if I don't even have an IP, I can do nmap -o timnash.co.uk, and it will return back and it tell me that the ports 22, 80, and 443 are open. Not a total surprise. It's SSH and then the two, the HTTP and HTTPS. You'll be amazed what other things are open though. And once we can start building up pictures of what's open, we can start knowing about other services and things that are happening. We can use -ss, which is basically this doesn't. How this works is this is sending over the request, and you can't use this with -o as well, because what you're doing is sending over the request and not completing the handshake. So you're sort of saying hello, and then before you, the server can respond with hello, who are you? You go, ha, I've taken my hand away. So it's much more silent. It doesn't always trigger security rules. So if you were trying to get around not being spotted quickly, you'd use this. But obviously the downside to this is that it might not return information that you want. The opposite of this pretty much is -sv, which is hello. Tell me who you are. I want to know all about you. And it asks for the banner information back. This completes a full handshake. So the server definitely knows that you've talked to it because you've asked for extra information and you've had that returned to you. Nmap as a tool is super powerful. And while they're the only examples I'm going to use for today in that, pretty much everything I'm going to show you with WP-Scan later, we can actually do with Nmap because it provides user scripts. So you can just go and run all sorts of user-defined scripts, either by your own, but there's whole catalogs of stuff there. There are plenty of people who just use Nmap as their pure tool for doing nearly all security testing. So have a play with it. Nmap is one of those tools that I actually use day in, day out, but not necessarily for security. I just need, if I need to know if a port's open somewhere, I'll just throw Nmap at it. If I want to find out what things are on my network, I'll just go use Nmap because I can do a broadcast ping with Nmap across the entire of my local subnet. It's a really useful little tool. Let's now make some more noise. Everything from here in out is loud. That means that you're talking to a production server, it's going to be recording into its logs, it's going to be triggering security rules, it's going to be making noise. So at this point, make sure you have permission, because otherwise, and if you have control of your WAF, don't turn the WAF off. Too often do I come across somewhere that says, particularly if it's pen testing companies doing PCI scans, they'll say, turn your WAF off. And you go, no, you've misunderstood the point of a firewall. It's to keep you out. Not, if I turn it off, it doesn't do its job anymore. But if you can, set your WAF so that it doesn't immediately block the IP address completely. Still decline whatever request it's making, so it's getting the correct information. Just don't then block it. Otherwise, you're going to be having to go through a bunch of proxies, and it gets very messy. At this point, it's also worthwhile talking to your host and just letting them know you're doing this. Even with something as simple as WP-Scan, they'll probably want to know just so they can discount what you're doing. So I've sort of already introduced WP-Scan a little bit. WP-Scan is a fantastic tool. It's a Ruby application, and you simply pass it a URL, and then it will go and do stuff for you. So if you pass it a URL, it goes and does a bunch of processing, and it brings back a load of information. By default, the information is not massively interesting, and it's all passive. It's all just getting information off the website. Later on, it can do more interesting things. But for example, oh, look, our interesting headers from earlier. It immediately returned those. It finds things like robots.txt. It then works out where locations are in it. Now, from its name, you've probably worked out that WP-Scan is specifically for WordPress, but it's obviously bringing back generic stuff. It also starts going to folders, and it's making effectively requests to those folders. So it's trying to work out whether it's getting a 404 or a 403 if it hits a specific directory or a specific file. So in this case, it's located the must-use folder. It knows that the JSON API is available. And it's also gone to the JSON API, and it's brought back some users. So it's now seen my usernames. This is the good point to ram home the fact that usernames are not secret. There are many, 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 many ways to get usernames. So if you're ever trying to, if you're ever sitting there and someone's telling you about the security precautions they've taken to stop users being found, laugh at them, and then point to them to the sitemap, to the JSON API, to the authors page, to query parameters, to the search, and there are just so many ways to find a username. So if anybody's ever told you that they're hiding usernames for security, they're not. It's silly. Don't do that, because they can be found. And honestly, your password is what's protecting you, not your username. That was a little side rant. I'll stop now. But yep, so it's got that in there. Now it's saying it can't work out the WordPress version. That's because I'm an evil person and I take the generator tag out. So if you go into any WordPress page, you view the source, you'll see that there's a generator tag normally there that says, this was generated by WordPress 5. blah, blah. I take it out. I don't take it out for security particularly, because I try to always make sure that my WordPress site's kept up to date. And really, that only becomes a security issue if it's not kept up to date, because it gives someone an exact version. The reason I take it out is because I've always taken it out and it frustrates me. It also says it's looking for plugins via passive detection. Now, what that means is that it's opened up the homepage and it's looking through the source code for known plugins via the WP contents/plugins, and then it will be looking for that URL string. And it's basically finding anything that's in there and it will replace it out. Because I use a CDN and I changed the asset URLs for things like JavaScript and stuff, and because it's all minified, it never finds it through passive detection. Again, this is just a happy circumstance. It's not something specifically I've done on this site. If, however, we give it the -- enumerate P, it will go off and do the same thing again. We get the same information back, but now we get some more plugins. It's found 8 plugins. Now, enumerate P just gets the most popular plugins and it goes and finds them. How does it do this very clever thing? Well, it goes to /WP content /plugins /atomic-block /readme.txt. Did it 404? No. Did it 200? Yes. What's the version? I'm thinking few people might have worked out how they can defeat WP Scan's plugin detection system quite easily. But this is it. So minus P, enumerate P gets you your sort of, I think it's the top 1,000. You can do AP, which is all plugins in the WordPress repo. Yeah, it takes some time. You might want to go make some coffee, have a nap, etc., etc. But when it comes back, it brings back not all of them as it happens. I had a few extra on there, which when I did this test, which was a while ago, I don't actually know why it didn't bring all of them back. But it finds a lot more. And we can actually see that it now finds the event calendar and the event calendar shortcode plugins, which were the reasons for our headers from earlier on that were quite weird and interesting. And it's bringing back the various versions. Now, my site's a bit boring. I keep things up to date. What if it found something interesting? Let's say we're running a very old version of WooCommerce. And it was out of date. Then it would bring back the information saying this version is out of date, and it would list us some vulnerabilities. Now, how it knows that these vulnerabilities exist is because it looks up to the WP vulnerability database, which is in fact WP Scan's internal database system, but it's also available as an API and other bits. So it's basically found it's gone and checked the version, and it goes to the database and goes, hi, I've got version 3.42 of WooCommerce. Are there any vulnerabilities known for 3.42? And it comes back saying, well, actually, yes, there is. This version is vulnerable, and here is the information about it. Now we have some information that we can use. So much of security is about finding these vulnerable versions. It's not about finding new things. It's fixing the stuff that's already broken. So nearly always it's out-of-date stuff. There will be updates available. If you do nothing else today, go run WP Scan. It will, especially if you know you've got out-of-date plugins. If everything's always kept completely up to date 100% of the time, WP Scan is going to be boring most of the time. But if you run even slightly out-of-date software, WP Scan will be a fun experience to be had by all. You can also run it as a plugin. Now, running it as a plugin has one massive advantage, and that is that it's not going via your web server to make those requests. It can just look up and say, hey, what plugins have I got? Okay, and then compares those plugin versions directly. So it's not doing any of the hard work, and it won't be caught by any of the security any security that's in your way. There are other services that do this as well. They look up to similar databases or the same database because you can license WP Scan's database. Tools like Manage WP do that. There are a few others, and your host might also be automatically checking against WP Scan's database. So you can run WP Scan, which I recommend you just if you can let your host know and then just run WP Scan on your production site, you'll get a load of information back that might be useful to you. But also if you have some tooling that is checking against the versions of your plugins against your database, you can do that right now. This is something that a pen testing company couldn't do for you. because they don't have actual control over your infrastructure. And this is something that's done passively in the background. So you can just see whenever there's a vulnerable plugin coming up to date. Our next tool is something called OWASP Zap. Now, this is a massive plugin. This is not just one talk. This is 10 talks in itself. So we're going to use it in its most basic of basic modes. We're not even going to connect it up and use it as a proxy. So by default, originally OWASP Zap was a proxy. You had to go and do the things. You would attach Zap to Chrome or to Firefox, and then you would go around and you would click through to the areas that you wanted, and then it would intercept payloads and you can manipulate and change things. Now, over the years, OWASP Zap has got much more complicated, and you can now put in all sorts of things. It also has an automated mode. So we can just we can go install it, give it a URL, select what browser we want to use. So we can select Firefox headless, and we can send it on its merry way. We just say, no, I don't want to persist, and off it might go. Yay, off it goes. So we'll pass it through, and we hit the button attack. Now, let's face it, we basically just want a tool that we can press a button that says attack and it does stuff, and it's going to be amazing, surely. As you can see in this case, it's bringing back a bunch of stuff. Now, by default, this is not particularly aggressive. It's not like posting data to endpoints. It's not doing anything like that. It is just going through and passively going to every URL it can find, bringing back data and looking for things. It gives you information at the bottom. The interface is clunky. I mean, really clunky, and it's clearly a Java application. It's nowhere near as bad as Burp Suite, which is something that's quite similar, though on another league by far. But it suffers from this I am a Java application look. It also will produce false positives. So whenever we use an automated system that is just scattergunning as many tests as possible, it's bound to come out with bad information. For example, it thinks here that I am disclosing debug error messages because in a blog post I have the word PHP errors. Now, to be fair, that's sort of one of those things you might have not thought about when you were going to pass through, that someone might be writing about PHP errors, but it will produce false positives. Also, quite a lot of the things that it thinks are ridiculously important, you might not think. Remember, it's down to your personal risks and information that you're interested in. You can also go on the sites and you can start going down and clicking through. You can click on the header, you can look at the requests, and you can see if it's flagging things that it thinks there's issues with. You can then get it, you can click on it, and you can click on the individual errors, and it will then show you the relevant pieces of code that it thinks that there's an issue with. It also has an attack mode. Yeah, a button called attack, and then we can press it again and it does more attacking. Now, it's worth saying anything called attack mode is probably bad for the server that it's going to be, well, attacked. And what this does, the attack mode is much, much more aggressive. So, do not run this on a flaky piece of production hardware because it won't survive. This is something that you do in concert with telling people, because it will, if you haven't got a decent WAF up and it doesn't block it immediately, bad things could happen. You have been warned, but there is a mode called attack mode, and you want to press it because, yeah, I know, I want to press it too. So attack mode also allows us to do things like fuzzing. Now, fuzzing, it just provides a method. Fuzzing is a method where we provide invalid or unexpected data to a endpoint, and we see what comes back. We take those post requests, those or get query parameters, and we shove things into the query parameters that the query is not expecting, and we can then see what comes back. This is how we discover cross-site scripting and SQL injections. Now, here's how we might do that. We can go into our active scan, we can go to fuzz. So we've now created our scan. We go to a location. In this case, we're going to the WP login. We go to fuzz. We can then add through a bunch of bits. We can select what we want to fuzz for, which is an SQL injection. Now, this is just going to go through and it's going to do a blind SQL injection where it's basically just going to try variations on one equals this, one does this, one does this into the strings that we've just specified. And then we can add a payload that says, in our case, just goes okay, and off we go. Now, against the default WP login, this isn't going to do anything. So we're absolutely safe. This isn't going to cause anything. But we can build this up for anything. If you have built any endpoints of your own, you should be running them through some sort of fuzzer. Even if you're sure you've sanitized the endpoints, even if you're absolutely sure, just passing that endpoint via a WhatsApp just gives you that little bit of peace of mind. You could use a tool like SQL map, but Zap's got it built in. Now, I should say that Zap can also be used completely headless. You don't need to be using this GUI. You can take away the GUI and then you can put this as part of automated tests. So if you've already built an acceptance test that says, hey, I need this, this URL should exist and I'm going to post this data to it and I expect this response back, you can then add a second test that says, okay, now I'm going to take that URL and we're going to pass it to a fuzzer who's going to pass in a bunch of SQL injections and see if it gets any information back. So you can see how we can build up our testing within our normal testing procedures, which we all do because you all totally definitely test. Now, this is up till now, we've not targeted any users. And I strongly recommend you don't target users with things like phishing, etc., until you're at a stage where you've got a legal department to tell you how to do that properly. But we could at least test for passwords. So let's take this password. It seems relatively secure. 46, well, I don't know. It's a random password. And it's inside. We can go to our, and this is again something that we can do as a both black or as a black box test or a white box test. So if we do it as a black box test, we can take a brute force our way in. So we basically target the WP login endpoint and we can use WP scan or we can use nmap to do brute force. And we can basically go, we know who the users are because we found the users. We're now going to just start putting passwords in and go. So we start with, if we know that there's a user called Tim, we're going to go Tim. And then the next then I'm going to go Tim. The password is password. Nope. The password is pass1. Nope. Tim, the password is pass2. And through. We can use a dictionary attack, which is basically a big long list of passwords we know exist. And we can keep attacking until the server says, you know what, I've had enough of you, and stops it. Now, I'm pretty sure every single server, more or less, on the planet these days will limit your logins at some point, or will tar pit you, or be doing something else to stop this happening. So unless you have the most ridiculously poor password, this shouldn't work. Yet every single day, every site I've seen is always constantly bombarded with people trying to brute force. Now, we can do that, and it's worthwhile just doing it just to see what reaction your server is going to do. However, when it comes to actually testing the password strength ourselves, we can use a tool called Hashcat. Now, Hashcat takes a couple of bits in through. It gives you, you can export the, from MySQL, we'll export the hashes from the user table. And we'll put them in a file, which we'll call password list. Oh, sorry, we'll call hash.txt even. And then we'll take a password list, which is just a dictionary database. And then we can pass those two things through and the results. And we can see that with Hashcat, we can then specify basically, hey, this is a WordPress site. So it uses PHP ask, go and do your stuff. And as we can see, that hash got cracked. That what seemingly quite strong password was in a dictionary attack and was instantly found. Now, I, of course, picked that password and looked at it and went, yeah, that looks vaguely strong, and put it in deliberately. So that is, but it's a genuine password. If you go and look at any of the big password lists, you'll find it in there quite common. You can download the top 1 million, the top 2 million, the top 20 million passwords 20 might be a bit much. Even the top 1 billion passwords, you're talking about hundreds of megs of file in file size. This particular was looking through, it says up there, 14335744. That's a very big number of passwords that it went and checked to find that particular password in it. If your password has ever been compromised or has been on a site that has ever been compromised, there is a reasonable chance that it's sitting on a password list that can be reused like this. So it is worth taking your existing users' passwords, exporting them, and running them against Hashcat. The downside to this is you now know your user's password. You could build an automated system that goes through this process and doesn't store the result. It just stores whether or not a given hash was in the database or not. But it's worth just knowing, because then you can go to that user and say, I'm sorry, your password is now known and we've managed to break it. If your site has been hacked and your database has been compromised, this is the tool that a bad actor chances are going to be using to try and work out your passwords. Now, we have the advantage that we know we even know the salts and things, so this makes this whole process even easier. So when we've got through all the stages, we've done all these tests, we found some bad things happening. What do? We exploit it. Obviously, we don't nuke our own sites. Don't nuke your own site. Instead, we'll use something like the WordPress exploit framework or Metasploit, and all we're going to do is just prove that the thing works. Now, it's a testimony to the wonders of WordPress and the fact it takes up so much of the web that there are entire security frameworks devoted to it. WP Scan for finding issues, and the WordPress exploit framework, which is feels very much like its big brother Metasploit, as a means to exploit it. So let's say we'll take our WooCommerce issue from earlier. We can go inside the WordPress exploit framework and we can say use the exploit shell WooCommerce_shell_upload, set our host to our bad site, set our target URI to the /WP because that's where the WordPress bits are. Set a payload to execute, and this is basically saying run a command on the server, any command I want. Okay, I want to cat the WP config file. Now I have all the database credentials. Nice, that's fun. So once we've got our proof of concept, we know things are exploitable. Now, pretty much every vulnerability that's going to be sitting inside the WP Scan database, chances are there's a proof of concept knocking around somewhere for it, or there will be certainly for older ones. So you'll be able to test most of these, because just because something is vulnerable, we might already be dealing with it. So even if we're getting something back that says that actually WooCommerce is not up to date, our WAF might be able to defend against that, for example. I haven't really covered compliancy stuff. Now, compliance nearly always covers a gamut of stuff. And it's basically, does your servers and your systems and applications meet a very specific criteria? A easy-ish way to do this is nearly always you'll have to do some sort of automated scan, PCI DSS scans, and you go and pay a third party, Trustwave, somebody like that, who return you a scan, and they will inevitably tell you failed because something is wrong. The version of OpenSSH is wrong or whatever. Now, each time you do a new scan to get any mitigation passed, you normally have to pay them again. It's much more useful if you can run the same scans that they're running, and that way at least you only have to do their scan once. The tool I would recommend to use that is Greenbone/OpenVAS. OpenVAS is the open source version of Greenbone, which is in fact a clone of Nessus. It allows you to just go through, and there is a default template for doing PCI DSS scans. There are other compliance templates there as well, and you can just point it at your server and it will do the same scan as a PCI scanner will do for you. So you'll be able to get back those information ahead of time, and you can tick the boxes off before you hand it over. Finally, we come to reporting and mitigating this stuff. So reporting, once we've got a list of our known exploits, because honestly, we're not going to find hopefully we're not going to be finding stuff with fuzzing. That's our more fun advanced stuff. Chances are if we've found anything, it's got a known exploit because it's out-of-date software. It might even give us a dread score. Otherwise, we can work on our own dread score. Now, dread scoring has become a lot less popular, and there are other scores, CVSS, and similar scoring systems. I still recommend and use dread scoring because people understand it. But you basically come up with some mechanism for you to determine how scary things are. And the way we work that is damage. How bad would this attack be? How easy is it to reproduce? How exploitable is it? How is it? How many people are going to be affected by it? And discoverability. Now, discoverability is the D in the end of dread. Basically, if you've just found it, it's discoverable. It's that simple. So I drop the dread, the discoverability aspect. For all the others, I take the score out of 10, and then I divide by 4. So how bad would an attack be through this? Can we take over the entire thing? Can we just wipe all the sites out? That's 10. Can we do some really minor thing? That might be 1 or a 2. How easy is it to do? Do you have to be an admin to do this? Well, that's still a problem potentially, but yeah, and it goes through like that. Dread scoring is very broad, but it gives you a rough idea how you can score things. Once we've got an idea of how we're going to score a thing, we can go into remediation, which is basically fix it. Or I will always run my updates, because let's face it, that's what you should be doing. If we can't fix the stuff by updating, then we're going to try and block or limit access to stop it being fixed. And some things we cannot change. Some things we just have to accept are a risk, that we know that this potentially could be exploited in this chain that is 10 miles long. But that's okay, because doing so is, but it's also a feature. Not everything has to be fixed. Scary things, fix. Almost impossible to exploit things, you have to take a decision on the risk associated and the costs associated. There's very rarely a time where it's cheaper to get hacked than it is to implement something. But those times do exist. So when you're thinking about these things, and this is where a developer and a sysadmin might have to step away and let the product owner make that decision. Is it actually worth the risk? So, stuff you can run locally. WP Scan can be run locally against your dev stack. Zap can be run locally. Zap can be run as automated tests. It can be run headless. You could also set it as a proxy on your browser. Metasploit and the WordPress exploit framework, again, both can be run locally as long as you've got a local web server running. In production, I'd run OpenVAS only against your production servers. There's no point running it against your dev servers because it checks for things like, is SSH open? Doesn't really make any sense. All the dev stuff that I've just talked about, you can do in production, but remember you need massive amounts of permission. Be very careful. Also remember, if your staging environment is in your production environment, quite a lot of hosts will offer you a staging site, that's still considered production. Just because it's called staging doesn't make it any less of a production environment. So we're back at this and now talking about risks. And I said right at the start that if I was to pick a path, I'd go towards the dragon. And it's really simple. The dragon has clearly defined risks. There's a dragon. I can see the dragon ahead. I've been warned about the dragon. I can see that there's a danger sign. I know about the tree and I can see the thorns. The other side just looks too good. There is nothing to warn me away from it. And I can't test that. So I'm going to go and fight the dragon. I hope you'll come and join me too. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you so much. Excellent talk as always. And just so much incredibly important issues being raised through this, and a little bit less scary than usual. So thank you.
I told you it wasn't going to be scary. I'm just going to put headphones on so that you don't get any feedback.
It's such a huge topic, isn't it? I mean, security. There's so many aspects to this that we can get involved in, and and discuss. It really is a massive topic. So, thank you for taking it and delivering it in a way that is consumable, really, because there's it can be really quite overwhelming for some people when it comes to talking about security.
I think if we don't get rid of the barriers, we're never going to get to a state where people will take it seriously. Not they won't take it seriously. Too many people leave talks going, I need to go and hide somewhere, and I'm going to go and become a spoon whistler. And the problem is that fear is useful, but then they forget about it. And they're no longer scared by it. And then they go away and they forget that they're meant to be scared, and they go off and do their normal lives, which is fine, but their normal lives security suddenly goes off the list. So if we can make it really accessible, if we can make things, just go do this, just go be this, go work like this, then hopefully that means that people will take it at least partially seriously.
Absolutely. Yep. We've had a few questions come in. Are you happy to?
Sure.
Excellent. I mean, the first one, it's probably more of a statement really than a question. But Lewis, people are sadly still asking the question: at what point do you need to consider X? Ignoring that day zero really is the start. I think that's a topic that you obviously touched on this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't include security right from the start, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be panicking from the start, but if you're already thinking about your threats, and if you're already thinking in terms of this is sets of risks and risk modeling things, then you've already won, because if the moment you're in that mindset of, if we do this, could we do, and your mindset completely shifts. If developers are testing and told that security is their responsibility and not responsibility of a security team in the far off realms. Now, that doesn't happen so much in the WordPress space, but in enterprises and in larger companies, security teams are often the big baddies at the end of the corridor who come in at the end and tell you everything you've done is now wrong and needs to be sorted, which isn't very helpful. So, but if we include security from the start and all the way through, security doesn't become a burden, it becomes part of the process. And that's the key. We just need to make it part of a process, not a burden for anybody, including users.
Yeah, I think something we've just certainly discussed in the past is it's the human aspect of security as well, isn't it? And looking at the educating us as humans, and actually the soft squidgy bit behind the keyboard that's often a great area of risk.
How much of this, Tim, in your mind now is that we've got it, with the event or the advances of things like the headless environment and those sort of environments where WordPress is sort of removed in some instances? How much of this should be down to the responsibility of your hosting company to take the bases, rather than it all being down to the site developers?
Well, I don't think it's all down to the site developers. I think security is. I think I've wandered around the country with a talk called "Security is Everyone's Responsibility," and everybody has their part to play. Developers have a huge part to play because they write code. Now, if you're putting things on a headless environment, the front end is becoming remarkably more secure. The moment we reduce post requests, the moment we take away forms, the moment we're not talking to the server, our scope and becomes reduced. But that doesn't mean that infrastructure isn't there. That headless infrastructure might be sitting behind a VPN, but it might not be. It might just be sitting on a DigitalOcean instance, hiding in a corner somewhere, easily exposed and accidentally exposed because it was just sitting there completely open to the big wide world. So we can't take it for granted that just because we're in a headless environment that it's going to be any more secure, because our backend systems still exist. Yeah. However, from the hosting perspective, more and more hosting companies are getting much more proactive with security, partly because we don't like getting hacked. I went to a security conference and I gave a talk where I sort of said, at any one point at any given day, part of our infrastructure is hacked. And they looked like I'd just gone and committed some sort of horrible sin. Then I explained I work for a hosting company, and everybody went, that makes more sense. but we don't want our systems compromised. We don't want people's sites compromised. It's a pain to clean up. It's taking up resources. It's causing our hardware over time, because the moment someone is hacked, the usual way people find out about it, or one of the ways people find out about it, if it hasn't been caught in various systems, it's just your CPU usage goes through the roof. So our bandwidth goes up. So all of these applied extra costs. It reduces our lifetime on our hardware. So as a hosting company, you do not want sites hacked. Apart from, our squishy humans that pay us probably don't want their sites hacked either. But from a pure infrastructure perspective, we don't want our infrastructure damaged. So what has shifted, I think, is that there's a realization that the hosts can go, oh yeah, we can do all the things that we want to do with security because customers now want it.
Yeah.
It's not getting in the way.
Yeah, exactly. So an example there, and you used about feedback forms, is that you can go to third parties, or you can go systems where you're actually embedding a piece of code and the feedback form is sitting on their servers. The same way as when we were talking just before you joined us about payment gateways, and how nobody would stick their payment gateway, or there will be somebody who will disagree with me, who will say, I'll build my own payment gateway and I'll do it all myself and it will post to my own servers for them. I've gone down the route of, we do most of our feedback via third-party systems rather than directly onto our own servers anymore.
I think that's a smart way to do it. Make it somebody else's problem. But it's always worth remembering, all you're doing is shifting it to somebody else's problem.
Yeah, but if that's all they do and that's what they specialize in and they have the resources, then
they should be good at it. I mean, I'm very much of an opinion, if I don't want to, if I look at something and go, that's a lot of hassle, my first response is to go, who can I give that to? And it's not a bad mentality to have, especially when it comes with servers and hardware and things. But yeah, ultimately shifting it to somebody else is still shifting it to someone. So you're then relying on them, which is fine in some circumstances, and obviously everything's different. But I generally do that offload.
It does raise an interesting issue, though. I mean, Adam's question, you went into obviously the use of the WordPress exploit framework, so sort of answered that part of the question. But he followed it up with, I mostly asked this because the development of the tool seems to have lost a bit of momentum. It's not had any commits for a while. So this issue of if the tool then isn't being maintained, what's the next step?
Yeah, so I mean, I use it because it's a very simple example. To be honest, for my day-to-day stuff, no, I don't. If I'm going to be looking at proof of concepts, honestly, I don't tend to build very many because of what I do day-to-day. I'll be honest, I use Metasploit because I'm a script kiddie at heart. No, I will use Metasploit over the WordPress exploit framework. That said, while it's not had very many commits, it is still in some development. I don't believe it's in massively active direct development. But the reason I use it is it's a really good, subtly bring down into people's face, oh yes, there's a whole framework called exploiting WordPress. And it just rams home that point more than the software itself. Metasploit is, to be honest, the de facto used by everybody from script kiddies to actual pen testing pros. Mm-hmm. And yeah, for when I am looking to do some sort of exploitation, I will probably reach for that rather than the WordPress exploit framework, except in devs examples. But on the plus side, I'm a nice guy and I don't need to exploit stuff very often. I just need to decide whether or not it is actually a risk and take action on it.
I think you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned earlier is that you said that 99% comes down to one of the two known issues that are always out there. I think the other argument also to take that even further is that there are so many sites out there that if you have already blocked against those two things, they'll go off and find somebody else to attack. That's my experience. And one of the worst things when you first turn on something like a word fence or another thing that sits there and tells you how many times somebody is attacking you, and by default it starts telling your customers are going, I'm under attack, start running around headlessly shouting, and it's like, it's everything is out there and is under attack, and it's just you're seeing that noise level. But if you block those two things, as you said, that to me is the always a takeaway.
We as a host, we have login limiting that we have quite, I was going to say quite intelligently. We have a reasonable level of intelligence behind when we block an IP and when we don't. We obviously don't want to. The worst thing we could do is false block. And it's interesting because a lot of the security plugins block much more aggressively than we do. So they'll block before our blocking system has a chance to do so. So we'll get the email that says, "Hi, I've been attacked 60,000 times." It's like, you haven't. You've been attacked once by the same thing, but because you keep blocking it, they're just rinsing through the IP. It's the same attacker. They're just rinsing through their IPs and they're running out. But because of you, we now can't track that properly. And it can be incredibly frustrating. Seriously, the only time you should ever care about attacks, the only login you ever care about is people who are logged in. To the point that I've written a plugin called WP User Sentry, and its sole job is to email you when you logged in, which sounds daft, but it means that whenever somebody logs in, doesn't have to be you, logs into your account, you'll get an email. And that's the way it should be. You should be told when you've been logged into something. You shouldn't be told about the 60,000 times you didn't log in because you don't care. All that tells me is my plugin or my system is doing a wonderful job. But I don't need to know that because I trust it's doing a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
agreed.
the big numbers are to scare you. Not one of the major security plugins, but not so long ago, we found a plugin that literally was putting a random number in the number of failed logins. The guy, when we approached him, said, this, he went, "Ooh, yeah, that was just to demonstrate it." Like, faith.
Yeah, it is difficult because, as you say, it's the same argument in a reverse thing, nothing to do with security, but it's like that same question that you get the minute you launch something. Someone says, "Well, how many people visit our website?" Yeah, is that same instant reaction. They go, "But that doesn't sound the same as how many people watch the TV." And you're like, "Yeah, the problem is we can, in a way, know numbers, but also knowing numbers doesn't actually tell you anything if you have no quantification about whether that is a good thing or a bad thing."
Yeah, how popular you are with bots shouldn't really matter to you.
No, exactly.
And these days, I don't think historically there was a good reason for knowing how many. It was so you could go to your host at the end of the month and say, "You've just billed me for 10 terabytes of bandwidth and I'd like you to not." But these days, very few hosts charge for bandwidth, and those that do fully know that they need to exclude bots out of that list. So it's not costing you as the end user anything. And the only people who really want to get rid of the bots more are hosts, because it is costing them literally, and when you get too many, can cause problems. So just if your host has any sort of automatic blocking, please turn off your plugins that do it, or at least just disable that bit. Don't, obviously, I'm never going to tell someone to disable a security plugin, but just disable the login blocking part if your host already has login blocking, and chances are they do, because they care about stuff like this.
Yeah, as we said, it's such a huge topic. This, I mean, I think we could certainly chat for quite some time. But unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. Are you able to join us in the social for a bit?
I will come join in.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, I guess if anybody does have any other questions, then we can continue that conversation over in the social in a moment. But for now, Tim, really incredibly grateful for you giving your time and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. So thank you very much.
I'd just add, it was ever so slightly scary. I don't think you're ever going to get a non-scary talk from Tim, but there was, it wasn't as scary as they have been.
Okay. Hey, cheerful. Do you think the nuclear explosion was too much?
I suppose we're all sitting down ready for it this time. But sometimes I have had your talks and I've rushed out going, if I don't fix this, I'm in trouble, deep trouble. But there you go. That's what you bring.
Absolutely, brilliant, Tim. Thank you very much. We'll speak in just a moment.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Take care. Okay, so we're just going to very quickly wrap up this afternoon. Just want to say, as we start, as said earlier, big thank you to our sponsors. We're incredibly grateful to Automatic Cloudways, Dolly, Funnel Packs, Weglot, WinWP, WPMU Dev, and Yoast for supporting Big Orange Heart and the WordPress London Meetup. If you could, big.ht/thanks to send out that thank you tweet. We'd really appreciate it. WPLDN.uk/feedback. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this format. You know, are you liking the style? Do you like the way it's being delivered? We're always looking for feedback. We want to continually evolve and adapt our events to make sure that they are the most appropriate for you, the community. And speaking of which, we have our 100th WPLDN event coming up. 30th of July. Looking forward to this one. It's the last Thursday of the month. We've got two fantastic speakers. Michelle Butcher-Jones and Mary Job are going to be joining us for our 100th event. So very much looking forward to having a bit of a celebration. If you have any ideas, any thoughts around how to celebrate this virtually, then we'd love to hear from you. Back here for WPLDN Daytime on the 13th of August. How on earth are we talking about August already? Just feels a little bit scary. Abba Thakor is going to be joining us on the 13th of August as our speaker for that event. So again, looking forward to hearing that. For now, we're going to head over to live.bigorangeheart.org/social, and we're just going to continue some conversations. Feel free to join a table. Feel free to start a table. Don't feel that you have to stick on one big. You've got the opportunity to spin up your own tables and have your little conversations in smaller groups, should you choose to. I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to Leo, thank you to Paul, thank you to Diane, who unfortunately had to run a little bit earlier this afternoon. I just want to thank each of you for giving your time and being part of this event.
No problem. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Very good.
You're very welcome. And lastly, thank you to Tim for giving your time as a speaker this afternoon. If you are interested in knowing more about Big Orange Heart, bigorangeheart.org. For now, we're going to wrap up and we shall see you in the social in a moment. Take care all. Bye.